Welcome everyone to the Intro to Food Dehydrating virtual workshop. This workshop has been sponsored by the Hazardous Waste Management Program in King County, the King County Department of Natural Resources and Parks Solid Waste Division, the City of Federal Way Solid Waste and Recycling Division, and the South King Tool Library. I'm Jeanette Brizendine from the City of Federal Way. I have been working for the City of Federal Way for 14 years. I am your recycling project manager, so I involve myself in everything that happens in the city, education-wise, regarding recycling, garbage, yard waste, composting, hazardous waste, waste reduction, and more. We waste almost 40% of the food produced in this country. It does not get consumed. And so one of the reasons why we're hosting this food preservation class and this entire series is to help people realize ways that they can reduce food waste. And so tonight we're going to be talking about dehydrating ways that you can take your seasonal fruit, dehydrate and freeze dry them, and hopefully save them for the winter instead of having them go to waste. My contact information is on the screen. You're always welcome to reach out to me, email, phone, text, and then all our social media is also on there. I'd like to introduce my co-host tonight, Amanda Miller from the South King Tool Library.
Hi, everybody. I am your tech whiz, which is a generous title today, but I am also the executive director of the South King Tool Library in Federal Way. We check out tools like the ones you see on your screen, electric and manual tools, as well as expanding the definition of what a tool is. So we have branched into the food preservation realm with some really great commercial dehydrators, some pressure canners and equipment for canning, and an amazing freeze dryer that Jeanette is going to specially display for us. So I'm really excited about that. I will not take up much of your time. If you haven't heard of the Tool Library, please feel free to reach out to me. I can tell you much more about it. We are passionate about reducing waste, reducing consumption, and creating barrierless access for everybody in the community. So thanks for joining us, and I will toss it back to Jeanette. My contact information, of course, is there, and I'll put it in the chat. And if you have any issues technically, please feel free to message us, and I'll try to keep up with your questions too. So I'm excited to learn about dehydrating. So Jeanette, was I moving it to Hal, or were you coming back? I think I'll just go right to Hal. How about that?
All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is the first time that I've done one of these presentations for any of the agencies in Federal Way, but it's been an area we've been kind of working into. I just take just a short moment here to say a little bit about the Center for Food Preservation Arts. We started back in 2013 with the idea that sustainability and people working together ahead of time makes it easier for communities to recover if there have been some kind of a disaster or economic downturns, things like that. And over that time, it started growing, and we've been moving into a lot of different activities that are shown in the next slide. So we've done all different kinds of activities, workshops, classes, all the way from ones that can involve young kids up to ones that definitely are done in senior centers. But we also have some programs like the Preserving for the Hungry, where we take surplus apples and berries and turn them into certified jams, jellies, and applesauce, which we distribute through some of the smaller food banks, the ones that don't get as much funding. And during the pandemic, we were lucky in that we qualified as an essential service because of producing food. So with PPE equipment and social distancing, we were still able all the way through 2020 to be able to produce as much jams and jellies and applesauce as our goal, which was about 1,200 jars of jams and jellies distributed, as I was saying, through 3 of the smaller food banks. So in the next slide, we can start talking about dehydrating. And I love working with dehydrating, mostly because I've been discovering what a wide range of products and applications it has. Plus, with dehydrating, you can really expand out into areas you didn't think that you would be able to work with, including making herb mixes, dehydrating different things to be able to make cosmetics. Well, tonight we only have about an hour to give you an overview of dehydrating and freeze drying. So we won't be going into depth on any one part, but we're providing a lot of online resources. All of these have been vetted. They're all reliable sources. And so while some of them, if you've already seen it, or maybe you'll see it soon, the package under the essential ones are ones that I consider to be ones that really cover a lot of different things and would be good to have. But then there's a whole list of ones where we go into, you can go as deep as you want down the rabbit hole on all the different subtopics, like solar dehydrating and air dehydrating. So what is dehydrating? Well, first of all, it's a technique for preserving foods that is ancient. Pretty much every culture discovered that if you remove enough water from a food product, then it seemed to keep longer because microorganisms need available water to grow. And dehydration removes enough moisture to inhibit that growth. It uses low temperatures, usually under 165 degrees, so that it's not really cooking the food, which changes it and actually makes it keep, it's more subject to spoiling if you actually cook it and then leave it. So it needs those low temperatures and steady airflow. And the food is basically uncooked. So you always want to treat it with respect. You want to keep it sealed in a jar. You want to keep it out of sunlight. You want to keep it at a reasonable temperature, below 75 degrees when you're storing it. And the nutrient loss is really very low compared to things like water bath canning or pressure canning. The only home food preservation that protects more of the nutrients is freezing. But then you're going to have a freezer and have enough space. So in the next slide, if we go on to it, why do you want to dehydrate at home? It seems like a lot of work, but it expands our food options. And we can control the ingredients that we use and leave out ingredients that we don't need or things that may not be good for us. And as was mentioned earlier, it is one of the best ways to help reduce food waste. And when you reduce the food waste in your own home, that's going to overall reduce the cost of the food. And to have a well-stocked pantry with a lot of ingredients on hand, it's just so convenient. Plus, I have always been very interested in being prepared, not being like a prepper, but having things on hand for, if you're just going to run out. It's just great to be able to go downstairs. I have about 4 shelves completely filled with jars of dehydrated products. And I can't remember the last time I've had to run out to the store in an emergency because I'm missing just one onion or something like that. Also, that's having dehydrated products, you can put them together and make your own backpack meals and also emergency meals. And like me, if you have special dietary needs, like I'm a diabetic, you're able to create some products that support it. And we'll talk more about all these things as we go through the program. And next slide, if you would, please. So here's probably the way it all started, with air drying. And there are two basic techniques for air drying. One is hanging, and the other is to put it on trays. But the important thing in air drying is that there has to be airflow. And so if the trays you're using, they need to be kind of some type of a mesh tray. Now, this is a hanging dehydrator that I got years ago. And you want to be sure, if you're using either method, that you pick the day you're doing it. Because if it's a really, like up here, if it's a really rainy day, it's going to take a lot longer. And if it just sits in a real humid environment, you do run the risk of getting some mildew or molds on it. So with the trays, if it's 70 degrees or more in your environment there, it take about 2 to 3 days, but they suggest that you want to flip over the contents about every 12 hours or so. So twice a day, you want to flip it over. The hanging, that's pretty much self-explanatory. Those can just hang there. But in either case, you can also, if you don't want to have pieces of the, like for example, the herbs drying and falling off, you can put them in paper bags, but you want to be sure and punch holes in the paper bags, like with a one-hole punch, so that there's constant airflow. Then the second form is on the next slide of dehydrating, and these are solar dehydrators. These are some homemade ones. They're all over the websites. There are many different plans for them, and you can also buy really expensive ones that are commercially made. But we have a reference to one in the going a little deeper, and that's where I discovered that the most important thing, if you're going to do solar, it's like with real estate: location, location, location. If you're here in the Pacific Northwest, there's only a small window of time during the year where you're going to be able to get that 8 to 12 hours of sunshine with low humidity that you really need to make this effective. Up here, what people do a lot is try to get solar dehydrators that they can move like in and out of a garage or something like that if they need to. And then there are some appliances in our home that we can repurpose. That's in the next slide. So you can dehydrate in an oven, but you also want to avoid cooking it. So the ideal would be if you have an oven that is, let's see, I think the lowest that I've seen, unless it's one of those warming drawers in an oven, which I have, which is great, but you want to try and keep it below 180 degrees for sure, but around 165 would be perfect. And you can do it on trays. There's also different ways. One of the resources is from a group called the Spruce Eats. And they do talk about ways that you can use an oven that gets higher than the temperature you want, but you have to get a oven thermometer, and you have to like turn the oven on and off, on and off. So that's really a lot of work and ties you up a lot. Now in microwave, there's pretty much you can dehydrate anything, but the general approach with a microwave is you can put it in one of those paper bags with the holes punched, especially if it's herbs, or you can put it on a microwavable tray, but between 2 layers of paper towels. And you want to do it in bursts of like 30 seconds, check it, 30 seconds, check it. And it's fast, but it also then is something you have to watch a lot. So that's what I think is one of the beauties of dehydrators, which we have in the next slide. So this STX International, I believe that's the style of the professional that you have at the, And then I never did get a picture of the conventional, but the other one here is pretty much representative of the other type. Now, what's cut off here is the captions on the very bottom. The STX has the caption that it is a vertical airflow. I know it's not
Horizontal.
yes, it's a horizontal airflow. I knew I was going to do that. Have you ever done that where you start thinking too hard about what you're going to say?
All the time. All the time. And that looks like the other one that we have too. So that's perfect. But yeah.
Okay, and then the
Yeah.
other one is the vertical airflow. And the difference is it's there in the name. With the professional one on the Excalibur and some of the others, the heat and the air comes from the back and it moves evenly across all the trays, and it hits the front door and bounces back. And so all the trays get approximately the same heat and air all during the process, which is good, because with the vertical ones, and pretty much all of them now, the heat and the air is in the bottom. In the past, they used to put, there were some models where they put the heat and the working parts in the top. And so you had like this really heavy thing you had to lift off. But with the vertical flow, you need to rotate the trays often. You need to like take the bottom one out, put it on the top, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they both work fine. And I have both kinds and have used both kinds. So let's go to the next picture. Features that pretty much are common on, except for the really, really low end models. It's going to have a low temperature, usually setting between 95, 165, steady airflow. I don't think they make the models anymore where the air fan would turn on and turn off, but that was very, it used a lot more energy that way to do it. Plus, if you, the internal controls for that airflow went off, sometimes then you wouldn't get enough airflow to remove the moisture. Should be able to control the temperature, and it's good to have a timer. It can go up to 24 hours. There's very little that I can think of that you need to dehydrate for 24 hours. That would usually be some type of jerkies or things like that. But it's nice to have all those features. And then also, moving on to the next slide, it should be made of durable materials. And it's really good if you can look at a model, because some of them, especially the vertical airflow ones, are still made of very flimsy material. But this one that we have here is an Excalibur. It's really good plastic. One of the Excaliburs that I use almost every week for sure, I've had for probably 12 years. And so it's used every week. Then you get their mesh trays that go on the plastic tray, and then there can be Teflon sheets that go on top of that, or like the STX dehydrators, they're metal, and that's of course the most durable, but then we're starting cost. Some of these professional ones, you can spend as much money as you want, but you know, you usually get what you're paying for, and you get a lot of durability. The Excalibur are a little bit pricey, but they're what I would consider a mid-range. And then you can go down, you can get a decent dehydrator for under $100. And warranties, I would say you should get a warranty. The Excalibur, they don't have an option for extended warranty, but 2 years after I had gotten it and the 1 year had broken down, I called them up because the temperature control, the dial had broken and I couldn't really set the temperature, and they replaced it anyway. So you can work with a good company. So next slide. So we don't have a lot of time, but I want to be sure and cover a lot of the high points. And so I'm going to talk about different things and different products that you can make. But then also, as we're talking about those different ones, I'm going to be able to cover some of the techniques. Forgive me for being distracted, but when something pops up from the chat, my eye goes right to it. But you can see like the first column there, the white are potatoes, and you can see they don't lose a lot of size when they dehydrate. But then like the yams and the zucchini and the carrots, they compress a great deal more. Now, whether it's a fruit or it's a vegetable, the minute it's picked, enzymes start to deteriorate the nutrients. And so one of the things besides cleaning your fruit and your vegetables really well is you want to stop that enzyme action. And with vegetables, whether it's a leafy green or a potato or peppers, you do that by blanching, by putting them into a hot water bath for just the minimum amount of time, taking it out and cooling it, drying it, and then dehydrating that. And one of our sources here, the Earth Easy Guide, it has lots of information, including suggested timetables for the blanching. Now with fruits that are in the next picture, that you usually don't want to blanch them because fruits will just kind of fall apart more. But you still want to stop that enzyme action. And the way you do that is by cutting the pieces to the size and shape you want, and then putting them in a bath that has been acidified for a little while. Usually about 1 to 5 minutes. There are lots of suggestions. The Earth Easy Guide gives you the ratio of the acid to water, and you use something like ascorbic or citric acid or citrus fruit juice like lemon, and that will stop it. You can see the apples came out, they're actually whiter, they browned less than what it looks like in this picture. The bananas, when you dehydrate them without any kind of treatment, a lot of the time they'll turn really black. And I don't know why the peach slices came out darkening, because they usually are a lot brighter than that. All right, go to the next one. Okay, canned beans, frozen vegetables. You're saying, well, they're already shelf stable. Why do you going to waste time and dehydrate those? Well, for a couple of reasons. With frozen vegetables, if the power goes out for an extended amount of time, that's not going to work so well. But then dehydrated products like these take up a lot less space and they're a lot lighter. So if you're going to do any hiking or you want to prepare quick cooking emergency meals, you're going to want to take those beans and you're going to want to dehydrate them because they will rehydrate and cook really quickly. And that's much better than to have those on hand for the backpack meals and things than it would be to be trying to take all the time and water and energy to cook dried beans up. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. So when you rehydrate, there's a couple of different ways to rehydrate. This is one of the videos that we did at the Point Defiance Ruston Senior Center that's on our YouTube channel, which you're going to have a link to. But you can see on the dehydrator tray, right almost at the bottom of the slide, the thickness was about a little over a 1/4 inch, and then they reduced down very well, and they were treated and blanched, and you can see that they haven't lost any of their color. They haven't gone brownish. And so it's very simple to rehydrate vegetables. You can do that outside of a recipe, but then also, like in the next slide, we have a recipe for au gratin potatoes, and it contains enough liquid, and you let it sit, I mean, there's a process with it, long enough that it rehydrates without you having to do anything beforehand. And so we have some PDFs files that you're going to be getting when the rest of the information is sent out to participants that have a lot of different recipes in them. And we can go ahead to the next slide. So I mentioned the special diets. I'm not very fond of sweets. Sugar per se has not been my downfall, but carbohydrates, and especially things like chips, have. And so when I found out that I could make my own, like zucchini chips and other different kinds of chips with different flavorings on them, and they're like almost no carbs at all, I was just in heaven. And one of my favorites right now, especially since I grow a lot of tomatoes in the summer, is to cut about a 1/4-inch slice of the thicker tomatoes, like not like Big Boy or those, but ones that are the paste tomatoes, because they hold together a little better. They're a little denser. Dehydrate those with a little Parmesan cheese and garlic powder. And they're just like really, really good, and they satisfy my need to crunch on something. And the next picture. You can also make a lot of no-bake cookies and things like that. This happens to be a keto-friendly recipe, but it's just thick yogurt, like a Greek yogurt, and shredded coconut. And you can mix, if you've got really fine shredded coconut, you can just mix it up straight, or you can run it through a blender. But then you just take teaspoonsfuls of it and dehydrate it for 6 to 10 hours at a fairly low temperature. And they are just delicious. I gave some to one of my neighbor who has some small kids, and at first they didn't like them because it wasn't really sweet. But after, they'd had them a couple of times, they really started to love them. And so she's seeing ways to maybe start weaning them off of so much sugar in their diets. Let's see, next slide. Oh yeah, and then talking about sweet treats, things like fruit roll-ups, which I discovered that actually the name fruit roll-up is trademarked by the Nabisco Corporation. So I'm calling them fruit rolls just in case. But you basically puree combinations of different fruits. This was some that I made out of just one of those big bags of the 3-berry mix that you can get at Costco. You just puree it. I didn't add any extra honey or agave or anything, but some people do. But you do throw in a little bit of lemon juice because that helps hold the color. And then when you've dehydrated them and they're still pretty flexible, you want to cut them into the size you want, and you can roll them up in parchment paper, and that will keep them easy to handle, and you can like put a bunch of them in lengthways in a pint jar and store them that way. Okay, next slide. Now, I have always been interested, as I mentioned, in being prepared for emergencies and disasters. During my life, I've been through what would technically be called 4 natural disasters: big Yellowstone fire, hurricane, a big tropical storm down in Houston, and then you can also count the pandemic. But I like to go ahead and, if I have things that I want to use up, I will dehydrate them and save them, and then mix them together into big jars of like 3-bean soup mix or veggie soup mixes. And then you can take those, next slide, and package them as individual meals. And then you can take these individual dishes that you've made, and in the next slide, all of these things, like this is a breakfast pack that you would put in a large, up to a 1 or 2 gallon Ziploc baggie. And you can see what the contents are. And it also has an instruction sheet for some of those. But you know, this the breakfast one, a standard one would be coffee powder. I drink a lot of coffee. Dried fruit, protein enriched instant oatmeal, which that means is it's just regular rolled oats, but it's got chia seeds and flax seeds and sunflower seeds in it. And you can also put some other dried fruits if you wish. And then we'll talk about eggs and meats and dehydrating a little bit later, but probably going to want to use freeze-dried meats and eggs for these packages. Lunch pack, that's basically a really rich vegetable soup, dried pork, bouillon for flavoring. You could have used vegetables, tea, almonds. Okay, next slide. And then that's a big cup full of the vegetable soup that I made up. Okay. Now, we talked about the fruit rolls a little bit earlier, and basically those are dried to the point where they're still flexible. But then you get to leathers and barks and powders. A leather and bark is often used interchangeably. It's when it's been spread very, very thin and dehydrated to the point that it's really crumbly. Now, this is a tomato-based one with some herbs and spices added to it. And so in the next picture, though, you can see you can make barks, a lot of different ones, like out of cooked and pureed corn, potatoes, strawberries, kiwi. And those are good for putting in, like with backpacking or emergency meal things. But then also you can take them, and you don't, the more surface area there is, the more chance you have that it's going to absorb water. So you want to leave it as big as pieces of bark as possible. And then when you're going to use it as a powder, you grind it up just before you use it. But you can like thicken a soup with a potato or corn powder. You can puree the strawberries into a powder and put it like in a muffin mix or a yogurt and just disperse that flavor all the way through. And so next picture. And this is something I actually made up this recipe using some of that tomato paste leather and then herbs that I had grown and dried, and then just some regular high quality salt. And so you can make your own spice mixes, your own seasoning mixes, and you can control the ingredients that way too. Like you can a lot of spice mixes have anti-clotting agents in them. And there's nobody that's really studied those because they technically are supposed to be inert. So we don't know what some of those things are doing to us. But you can leave those out because you have the opportunity to, like it says here, tear the leather into small pieces, chop it up. You can make all this stuff right when you need it, as opposed to having it sit around and having to add chemicals. All right, next slide. Now, if you're going to, especially for producing things for emergency meals, you want to cook the grains and rice and lentils before you dehydrate them. Raw food versions of crackers, breads, granolas, if you're into the raw food movement. Low-fat meats and seafood. You can make jerky with it, or you can dehydrate it, but you need to stick with low fat, because if there's a high fat content, it has the opportunity, even when it's dehydrated, of going more rancid. But any meats that you're going to use or seafood, they strongly suggest that you heat it to an internal temperature of 165, which is basically partially cooking it. Things that are strongly suggested by all the different reliable sources is not to dehydrate high fat content foods, and at least on my screen it's cut off, or eggs, because the high content fat we'd already talked about, but eggs just seem to attract salmonella. And so there's always that danger there unless they have been freeze dried. Okay, next picture. And then this is all of our contact information. The website has many different pages, has recipes, it has articles, it has informational, it has a bunch of my ramblings. We have a Facebook page where we have most immediate things and notices, like we're going to be starting to have more in-person classes after July, I hope. I've really missed that. It's going to be. And we have the YouTube channel. We're up to about 23 videos now, all different kinds of things. And in the resource, we list ones that are specifically related to doing things with dehydrating. And we always need supplies and funds to support our Preserving for the Hungry program. And if you just want to email me at that address, I'll get in touch with you and pick up donations, or just talk to you. And we're going to be starting to be able to do during the whole pandemic, and we're still under that guidelines, that we can only have a maximum of 5 people working on the Preserving for the Hungry, as opposed to sessions where we could have 10 to 15. But those restrictions are going to start getting less and less. And so that's all I have to say. I saw there was a lot of different questions come up. I look forward at the end of it to being able to talk with you with some of your questions. But now we'll go ahead and turn it over and talk about freeze drying.
Hi, everyone. This is Jeanette again from the City of Federal Way. Thank you so much, Hal, for that very enlightening information on dehydrating. I'm excited to get some of our summer produce. My strawberries are everywhere, so we'll be doing some dehydrating soon. So today I am going to talk about freeze drying, which is very similar to dehydrating. So the freeze drying process, you take your food and you freeze it, and then you put it in a special machine, and it's under pressure, so it sublimates, which means the ice crystals, instead of going from ice to water to steam to evaporate, it goes straight from ice crystals to gas. And so that makes it so that the cell walls don't break down in your produce. And then you seal these up in oxygen-proof containers, vacuum seal bags, and usually people will use oxygen absorbers. So like I mentioned, these are very similar. And I will say that a lot of this slides and information came from the manufacturer from freeze drying machines. So they are a little slanted and make the freeze drying process look really good. But please know that the information that Hal gave you about the water content and the nutritional information and the shelf life is probably a little bit more accurate. But just a comparison, the freeze drying can remove a lot more moisture than dehydrating. So it should be able to be shelf stable for a longer period of time. One of the things, as you saw in the pictures, sometimes the color changes a little bit. In the freeze drying process, you have the fruit that looks very similar to where it was before you freeze dried it. So it'll be a similar shape, a similar color. It's just no water in it. And this number, where it's a 60% of the nutritional content, is much lower than what the most studies show. It's more like about 70 to 75%, is that right, Hal? Where the freeze drying does contain a lot of the nutritional content. So you can see in these pictures, the bananas, raspberries, and strawberries, where the freeze-dried produce is on the left and the dehydrated is on the right. So the freeze-dried does remain larger. And again, that's because when it's frozen, all the moisture in there has crystallized in that spot, and then it's sublimated off. So it still retains its same shape in the size and the color. So they are a little bit different. They're much lighter weight. So dehydrated things are much lighter than the ones when Hal was talking about camping and hiking. The freeze drying is even lighter because it has less moisture, but it does take up a larger amount of space. So depending on if you're camping or hiking and you want something, where is your ratio to weight to size? Because you can dehydrate a bunch of strawberries and they're going to be a little heavier, but they'll take up a much smaller footprint than if you freeze dry them. So just things to think about. And again, you can do a lot of the similar foods. You can freeze dry the high fat items. The one downfall of, there's a couple downfalls of freeze drying over dehydrating. One is it is very, very expensive. Food dehydrate or freeze dryers with a oilless vacuum pump, like the one that Amanda has at the tool library, is going to run over $3,000. So it's really not realistic for a lot of people to just buy that just for fun. But it is at the tool library. You can check it out and you can use it for specialty things if you want to do a bunch of fruit, or if you want to make up soup mixes, or if you want to compare the dehydrator to the freeze dryer, you can do that. The other thing is it does take a lot longer than the dehydrator. So you would take your food, freeze it, and then the freeze drying process can take 1 to 2 days. So it's a little downfall there. As Al mentioned, almost all the foods can be dehydrated, and again, freeze dried as well. I have tried a wide variety of things in the freeze dryer, and I found, especially for like ground beef, putting it back into a tomato sauce if you're making spaghetti with freeze-dried ground beef, very hard to tell. But if you are eating it on its own, like a taco meat, without being mixed in with anything besides water, there's a little bit of difference. But again, if we're talking about preserving things, so this might have been something you might have thrown away that you couldn't get to or you don't have freezer space for, if it can be freeze-dried, it's great to be able to do that. I've done a wide variety of fruits. Usually as soon as I get my fruit done, my children eat it before the next batch comes out. They absolutely love it. If anybody has little toddlers and you see those really expensive little yogurt drops that are like $3 for 0.001 ounces, you can make that in the freeze dryer. They are delicious. The kids love them. So lots of fun things you can do. And then just another plug, the tool library does have this equipment available for checkout. So they have the freeze dryer, the dehydrator, vacuum sealers, and then also pressure canners. And then I'm going to take just a moment and show you the actual.
We might have to start a reservation wait list for it after today, but
yes,
so excited.
So, and this is the actual freeze dryer from the tool library. So you can see it is quite large. It weighs about 60 pounds, so it's very hard to move in. You'll want a hand with it. But we'll have wonderful instructions. It has 3 trays in it that you can use. And this is some of the food that I freeze dried. So you can see the strawberries are very similar and look very similar to a strawberry. I did some yogurt drops and I have some mango pieces.
Can you show us how crispy they are, Jeanette?
And I will absolutely do that. So I'm going to hold this up to the microphone. So hopefully you can hear it. So this is mango. So you can even see kind of the powder comes off. So it is very crispy. They're wonderful snacks. And for the making soups and stews, this is a wonderful way to preserve your food. And then again, you might want to complement it with a vacuum sealer. For most of my things, I just reuse jars because we go through these so quickly. And so I think we'll go back to doing question and answer. And while Hal's getting ready for that, I just want to do one quick promotion for our next class in the food preservation series. Sorry, I lost my spot. Hal, you have a lot of slides here.
You're not sharing screen yet either, Jeanette.
No, I'm trying to get back to the last slide.
Oh.
I have to click through the whole.
Yeah. Well,
series.
real quick here, we had a question about after it is freeze dried, after items are freeze dried, do you have to keep them frozen? And no, you do not. I think that someone generously answered that question in the chat, but they can be shelf stable, packaged with those O2 absorbers, and then vacuum sealed, and they will last for, well, that's what goes with astronauts. That's what I think of immediately when I think of a freeze dryer, is astronaut ice cream, because that was the popular thing when I was a kid.
And then one of the questions that I had in the beginning that other people might have. So oxygen absorbers are these little ones, and it actually says O2 absorbers. So it's different than the other packets that you get that said do not eat. So the ones that you want to use for oxygen absorbers for long-term storage will say O2 absorbers.
Desiccant bags would not be the right thing. And someone asked about using O2 absorbers from vitamin bottles. And I don't know if there's a specific, manufacturer warranty or whatever for using those secondarily. But Jeanette, do you have any thoughts?
I asked the freeze drying company, and they said once the other ones were exposed to oxygen, they can only absorb so much oxygen. So this one that I held up was actually one that I got out of another product. So I got a commercially made freeze-dried food. So I just took it and put it in this container of strawberries that I made. They're not going to last long around my house, but I would probably recommend buying new if it is long-term storage. If it is short and you're just planning to make snacks for yourself, your kiddos, for hiking or camping, something you're going to use in the next couple of weeks, it's probably not that big a deal. Just keep those containers sealed.
If I could jump in here just on with dehydrated foods, for long-term storage, you want to keep them in something that's airtight. Vacuum sealing is great to vacuum seal it. But if something you're going to be opening and closing, getting some output in, there are commercially available moisture absorbing packets, the desiccant. And what's great about those is you can recharge them by putting them in the microwave for about 2 minutes, and it will take the all the moisture out of them, and they'll be reusable.
That's great to know.
That's a good segue. Well, did you have the slide ready, Jeanette?
Yes. So in our food preservation series that we have had, our first class was on canning. The second one was on pickling. This class was on dehydrating, freeze drying. And our next class will be on making bitters, infusions, and stocks. So basically taking the food scraps that you have in your kitchen and turning them into something useful. So that class will be in 2 weeks, Thursday, June 24th at 6 p.m. You can RSVP emailing me at recycle@cityoffederalway.com, or you can go in to the posting on Facebook, and we'll post the Zoom link a couple days before the class. One special thing we have with this class is we are getting 50 kits. So we're getting starter kits to be making your own bitters and infusions. So this is limited to Federal Way residents. So the first 50, we're working with the speaker to get them at the tool library for pickup. So if you register for the class with me, I will email everybody when those are ready to pick up. Again, we will record that class and put it on YouTube along with our other classes. So if you would just want to watch it, that's great as well. Thank you, Amanda.
Could I ask a question related to those kits? I am not a Federal Way resident, but are these like commercially produced, or can we get a list of the ingredients ahead of time if we want to kind of like play along?
Absolutely. So our speaker works in Seattle. She's actually a distiller, um, and she will be selling the kits for $20 for anyone who's not in Federal Way, and we'll also send out information about how to make your own kit and what is required and what's just nice to have. So we'll get that out to everyone who registers for that class. Thanks, Hal.
Great. And I see a picture, a
There's
question.
Yes, there's lots of questions. I'm happy to, we can go naturally here. Yeah, how the last question that just came up was if you know of a place to get the moisture absorbers for dehydrated foods.
I got them through Amazon.
And that would, you would say like food grade moisture absorbers too, because they do have moisture absorbers for like your shoes and packaging.
Yeah, it's I always have trouble with the word desiccator packets.
I think of the Seinfeld episode, which means I'm old, but that's okay. Yeah, some of the other questions that came up, I have one more about freeze drying, and that was what size machine do you have for your family? And just to test, yeah, I'll let Jeanette answer that one.
So this machine that we have, this is the tool library's machine. I just brought it home for the demonstration. This has 3 trays in it. And the trays are not that big. They do make larger sizes, but we couldn't use those at the tool library because they're really heavy and big and hard to transport. So we did go with the smallest one for the tool library. And it does take a while. So it depends on how you're using it. I have some friends down the road that have a larger one and they probably use it twice a week. So it really depends on your household.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump around too much, but we had some questions towards the beginning. I just wanted to finish up because that was the only freeze drying question that I had left. So Paula asked what, and she re-asked the question, but what does the sun exposure degrade the nutrient content of food? And that would be for Hal.
You mean after it's dehydrated or preserved, or before?
I think it's just comparing it to maybe other methods. Maybe because, I mean, like cooking in all cases, she says during the sun drying, but
during the sun dry. You know, I don't have any hard facts on that, but I'm pretty sure that the longer it takes and the exposure to the sun, the more degrading there's going to be. That's the great thing about dehydrators and freeze dryers, is it's relatively quick compared to, like, you know, some of the sun drying, the air is like 2 to 3 days, or in the hanging it's up to 14 days, and then the solar, you know, it's going to be taking 8 to 12 hours of sun for as long as it takes. And they were saying it could be days depending on how hot, or it could be short. So I would say that probably solar and air are not as good as even an oven method or the dehydrators, nutrient wise.
yeah, she says she has a place in Grand Coulee, so it would probably be rather fast. But my mind goes to, you know, the longer you cook anything, the more it's not necessarily degrading, but changing in molecular structure with the fibers breaking down and the different things that you have. So you get a different kind of value, right? So it's interesting. There's some general questions that we kind of touched on that you could go, how long to dehydrate fruits and vegetables, and what the best fruits and vegetables are to dehydrate. But do you have any maybe rules of thumb, or it's really following a recipe would probably be best, or anything to stay away from there?
Well, it's really hard to, quantify when it's done, but it's usually, there are a lot of good descriptions in some of these sources. It's in a certain degree, it's an art. And it so depends on how much humidity is in the air when you're dehydrating, especially. Freeze drying, I mean, that's a closed system. That's going to be impacted by the humidity. But usually you want something, I should have got something to demonstrate with, but it would be bendable. Like say it's one of those potato slices. The edge of it would be, the whole thing would be bendable, and not like, you can't like fold it completely over without breaking it, but then you can go to greater degrees of dehydrating, removing more water. And I actually got one of these devices that you screw it on top of a jar and put the dehydrated food in, and it off gases moisture. And it's a meter, and it tells you how much water content off gases. And then you have to go through this mathematical thing and figure it out. And you can dehydrate anything. You can use it. I've dehydrated cooked beets and to make beet powder with, because it's one of those things that has, it's like, it will act like MSG without it being the bad chemicals like MSG. And you can throw a little bit of it in and it will accentuate other flavors without adding. So, these are some really interesting science kind of things.
That's what I say when I make my soup that's everything in the refrigerator, because I'm like, it's just enhancing the flavor of
There you
whatever
go.
I'm focused on.
Was that all in that question? It was pretty packed.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, that was a pretty loaded question. There was a specific question that Kate had about dehydrating oranges in the oven. She said she followed a recipe and, or maybe she didn't, but the temperature and dehydration was not quite right. Do you have the magic temperature for that?
It has to be under, if you don't want to, especially something like oranges, which have a lot of moisture and will steam and will turn into mush, basically. You want to get it much lower temperature. You want to get it down. You probably can't do those well in an oven unless you have a thermometer in the oven, or that it's like a warming tray oven. I haven't
Would a
had much.
convection oven versus
Most,
non-convection?
well, the airflow would be great, but most of those won't go down that low a temperature. Like mine, fortunately, I have the warming drawer, but mine, it won't go any lower than, what was it? Like 195. So.
Yeah, and someone else asked about dehydrating in an air fryer.
I have no experience with air fryers. I have no idea. And
I was just going to say my experience was that some of them were convection ovens, and they were just kind of marketed as also air frying, and that it's the same kind of argument that you had, getting low temps would be the problem.
I don't think that there's been much push towards that, only because I did a lot of searches and just asking for what are other appliances you can dehydrate in, or some variation of those. And I never came up with air fryer. I came up with things like easy bake ovens, if they still make those, but.
I have one of those. I have a 7-year-old. That was anyway. But it made me think of those things as gadgets they used to have in the 70s or something, that you could put in your car and supposedly cook while you were driving during the heat of the.
Oh, from that book, Manifold Destiny was the name of a cookbook. And you would put, yeah, anyway.
That's pretty funny. We have some of my favorite people here are Jim and Donna Cox joined us. Hi guys. They were asking about shelf life of dehydrated foods, vacuum sealed. Would it extend their life if you add the O2 absorbers? And then there was also questions about the preservation time of the seasonings that you made, like the tomato seasoning, and if that could be preserved and if it had to be put in the freezer or if that could be shelf stable, and about how long that would last.
Okay, let me unpack those. I'll start at the end and work backwards. Pretty much spice things. It's basically a spice mix, and I would not be so concerned with oxygen absorbers as, first I would be more interested in making sure you have moisture absorbers. Because especially with something like spice, you're going to be opening it and closing it. And so you're going to let moisture in, moisture out. Then I would add an oxygen absorber. And then pretty soon, you're not going to have any room for your spices because of all the little packages you can. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that certainly would. And yeah, vacuum packing and keeping it at 70 degrees or less in the ambient temperature and out of sunlight really can extend it. And if for some reason you really think there's something you want to keep for a really long time, and it seems kind of excessive to me, but it's recommended, especially like if you're putting together meals and you're going to be backpacking with something, freeze them. And so it starts out frozen so that half your trip it's going to be in lower temperature. But if you really want it, you can dehydrate, vacuum pack, and freeze it, and you used up all your toys.
And that was the other part of that, was like about how long do those last? I mean, I am guilty, as everyone, maybe not, for keeping spices probably far too long, but most spices last about 1 year, maybe.
Well, it all depends on how you slice it and what you're looking for. With
Literally.
spice, yeah. The spices, they deteriorate in flavor, but if you don't get them wet, they're not really going to spoil and they're not going to be dangerous. Like, unless it gets, like I said, wet and mold on it or something. But it's what you're willing to put up with. I personally have way too old spices, which is why I don't dehydrate a lot of them unless I know I'm going to be using it. I've like set limits, and about a year and a half. If you keep them well sealed, moisture absorbers, maybe in this case, oxygen absorbers.
Well, and that kind of raises, someone mentioned in the chat too, the if you break them down, the more you break them down, and that kind of goes in my mind back to like that idea of cooking, and the more you break things down, the less you have surface area, right? Like you increase surface area, you increase the probability of problem.
Yep, and I'm a great fan of, like, I have jars mostly of ingredients. I have some ready-made meals, backpack meals, emergency meals, and I have some big jars, that I've made of those things. But spices, things like that, I don't make the spice mixes ahead of time. I got myself a little coffee grinder thing that is just for herbs, and I keep them in their sealed jar and take them out when I'm going to make just enough for several meals or something.
Excellent. I think that answered almost all the questions. Well, and someone did ask as well about books that you would suggest. And I know we have lots of links, and so we'll be sending out resource sheets afterwards too.
Yeah, and there is a list of the books that I use. There's a lot out there. But there's a book called the Dehydrating Bible, or Dehydrators Bible, which is a really good one. And then there's also several books. If you are interested in like the DIY emergency meals or just dehydrating in general, there's an author who works by the title of The Backpacking Chef. And any of his books are really good.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I wanted to thank everybody tonight for coming out, listening to the class, for your questions. I'm going to end the recording now.